The philosopher Franklin Merrell-Wolff, who I consider one of my teachers, talked about something called consciousness without an object. There's awareness of objects. When I say objects, I mean ordinary things, tables, chairs, people, dogs, plants, anything you can name. So there's an awareness of objects, and then there's an awareness that transcends objects and yet includes them. There's an awakened state where objects arise and yet their true nature is seen as empty. I'm looking at a table right now, and I realize that when I say table, it's a thought, it's a concept. It is not ultimately real. It has a relative sense of reality, meaning I can put my coffee cup down on the table and it'll stay there unless I move it. And rules of physics and so on. There's a realization that that entity, that concept, it's a thought, a feeling, a sensation of an object, that it's not independent, that it depends on other things for its existence. Ultimately, it depends upon awareness for its existence. So I no longer see the table in isolation. I see the table as, in some sense, an extension of me. And what is me? Me is the self, another object, and it's just as unreal. I know what it is. It's a thought, feeling, sensation of who I am in a historical sense. By historical, I mean it exists in time. There's this awareness that envelops the whole thing and in a sense balances it out, so those things don't seem as alien as they might at times. And by alien, I mean an object that the existentialist philosophers might say is absurd. It's absurd because any object taken in isolation doesn't relate to anything else. Like my coffee cup, taken in isolation is an absurdity. But when I think of it in terms of what it can hold, well, it can hold coffee, obviously. And then I can drink the coffee. I can feel the effects of the coffee, which can be fun. So if I consider the coffee cup in relation to what I can do with it, it changes it, and it's less independent and more dependent. It's more relational. If I'm having a conversation with a friend and we have coffee and there are cups and tables and chairs, those things taken in isolation are absurd. You could practice that. You could just ponder an object and how, if you forget about its function, you forget about what it could be used for and just look at it by itself for a while, it starts to seem strange and alien, kind of. Coffee cups don't seem alien because we use them and we know what they're good for, and that sense of warmth and connection that we use them for, it makes them seem warm and inviting. So they don't seem alien on first glance, but if you looked at them long enough, they'd look strange. Like the handle sticking out could look like some kind of ear, and it's like, where's the other ear, and does it have a face? It just could be really weird. What I'm really feeling is this connection to my friend I'm having coffee with, and maybe there's light coming in the window and talking about things that matter to us and connecting on an inner level. So the coffee cup and the table and the chair, those things are just hanging out and supporting what's basically a relationship. It's a context for relationship. If you ever meet a friend somewhere, why do we say, well, let's meet for coffee? Well, it gives us something to do while we're talking. It gives us chairs to sit on, tables. I mentioned there's awareness of objects, and then there's what you might call consciousness without an object. Well, really this conversation is about what you might call awakened life. And awakened life is, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's basically happy. And it's not happy as opposed to sad, because sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're sad, and that's natural. It's satisfying in a way that's hard to explain. It's as if the ground of being speaks to us in our depths and transmits a feeling of warmth and happiness and well-being that we're all looking for. A key to this state is that it's an awareness of objects that doesn't judge, so it's a conscious state, and it's aware of the relative nature of objects that I just described. It doesn't take things in isolation. I mean, you could, like I'm talking about it. If I look at an aluminum can or something, I could isolate that and look at it by itself, and it starts to seem alien to me. Or I could shift my attention and allow an awareness of that can that notices that the word can, the concept that represents that thing, is temporary, it's transitory. I could crush the can in my hand and it would cease to be a can, or it would be less of one. I would see that the concept is really what I'm looking at. Imagine that there's this insane asylum, and everyone in the asylum is insane, and that you're one of the people in the asylum. And it's an unhappy place. It's confusing. Basically what insanity is, and again I'm simplifying, but insanity is believing things that aren't true. Like the world is flat, or the CIA controls the weather, something weird and alien. Again, these are just thoughts. But imagine this asylum is full of people who believe in things that aren't true, and these things are scary. They're just concepts, but they're scary because they're not true. So a flat earth is a scary idea. For one thing, you can fall off the edge into nothingness. Again, it's an object, a flat earth, taken in isolation, and it's scary. You could say that an unawakened state would be like being one of those people that's believing something that's not true. They're not independently true. What does that mean, to believe things are independently true? It means something like looking at a coffee cup by itself long enough in isolation where it starts to seem strange or absurd and alien. So in this asylum, everything seems strange and alien because of that. Basically, people are caught up in their thinking. That's all that is, caught up in thoughts. So an unconscious or unawakened condition would be that. Starting to wake up would be to realize that the thoughts aren't really true. They're not ultimately true. You start to realize that it's just a lot of nonsense. So it's like a light dawning. This light tells you that everything that these people are muttering and gossiping about and so on, that those things aren't true. It's a relief. It would be as if they're saying 2 + 2 = 5, and that's what's wrong with everything. It could be anything. Really, there are an infinite number of delusions that you could come up with. And that could seem scary until you realize that it's not true. So 2 + 2 = 5 isn't true. It's a relief to see it, and you start to become more sane. That light that dawns, this seeing of that, is what I would call consciousness. You start to detach from this insanity of the asylum. All of a sudden you notice that there's an open door. Wow, you could get up and leave. You could just walk out. So you become curious, you walk over, and let's just say there's light coming in through this door. Again, it's this light of consciousness. You go over to the door. In this case, it's really just a beautiful green meadow, trees, and maybe there's some cows grazing, or I don't know. Something beautiful. Maybe some bunnies. It's a very happy thing. And it's happiness for no reason. Why are we happy when we think of bunnies? It's beautiful. There's a sense of something very natural that we yearn for. And it's not to be found in thinking, it's to be found in realization. So you go over to the door, you walk out, and you're just happy out in this meadow with the bunnies. You don't need to know why. And it's as if to say thoughts arise, but you don't really even care anymore. I would say it's an experience, but it's more like a relaxing of that tendency to judge. And by judge, I mean to cling to concepts in isolation as if they were ultimate reality. So the asylum is this clinging to thoughts, and freedom from that. You walk out into the meadow, it's like, who cares? So you could say, in a sense, no thought. Take no thought for the morrow. And Jesus talks about the lilies of the field. They neither spin nor toil, and so on. They're happy. If you start thinking about that, like, are lilies happy, you'll start to get anxious. Why? Because you're thinking about it in isolation, and you're paying attention to your mind in a certain way that tells you that thoughts really matter by themselves. Like, there's a serious world to think about. I'm saying that there's a happiness that it's true whether or not thoughts arise. That happiness that I'm calling consciousness is so real that there's no time for thought. There's no time. There's just freedom, happiness, joy. So here's the thing. If you leave the asylum and, in a sense, wake up to the reality beyond thinking, could you go back into the asylum if you wanted to? The door's open. You could go back in there. Sure, you could go back in there. What would that reality be like? And I use the term reality loosely here. But if you were to go back from the meadow, go back into the asylum and hang out with those people once again, it's obvious that you couldn't buy into the stories anymore, the mutterings and mumblings and conspiracy theories and ideas and so on. That state of consciousness of objects taken in isolation, that attachment to thinking that the asylum represents, you couldn't buy into it in the same way, really at all. There's the freedom of the meadow, which is in a sense no thought. Then there's the hanging out with people in the asylum, and there are thoughts everywhere. You can hear people talking. There's a thickness, there's a density to that state of what I might call ordinary awareness, where things seem scary because thoughts are taken at face value as things in themselves, and it's not a happy place. So you could hang out there and it wouldn't be very pleasant, but you'd still be free, you'd still be happy because you don't buy into the nonsense anymore. So that state of consciousness without an object, is it nothingness? No, it's fullness. In a similar way that being in that meadow is, you're just happy. But to someone in the asylum, they'd say, well, why are you happy? Immediately, there's no way to answer it. Why? Because you can't really translate the happiness of the meadow into terms that that asylum would understand. Because in the asylum, the only things that are considered real are conceptual entities taken in isolation. And they're like little prisons for the mind. They're little unhappy boxes that we create and we live in, and it's very unhappy. So really we have it backwards. The little boxes are empty, so in a sense they're nothing. They don't have any reality by themselves. That's why they seem alien. What we're waking up to is that we can detach from that state and go out into the meadow and be happy. And then if we want, we could go back into the asylum. Why would we do that? Simply to help those who are trapped in that state of unhappiness that the asylum represents. And what makes that valuable is compassion. Compassion is just the awareness of that reality of freedom and a willingness to share that with others and help them break the spell of that unhappiness. What I'm calling consciousness without an object is fullness. The world is suffering. See, the world is the asylum. It's the world we create. It's lies. It's politics. From an unconscious or unawakened perspective, that meadow that I'm saying is fullness, that consciousness without an object, that realization, seems like nothingness. It seems empty. The Buddhists have a saying, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Basically, we have it backwards. We are attached to our thinking, to concepts, so objects seem independently real. If we start to become aware of something beyond that, where there are no objects, or no thoughts, really is what we're talking about, it seems scary. Why? Because that state of awareness annihilates suffering. It annihilates that tendency to attach to objects, to attach to thinking. So it seems like an emptiness, but it's really a fullness. And objects, while they seem full, are really empty. To use the asylum metaphor, it would be like if you're awake inside the asylum. Remember, the door is open. You're hanging out in the asylum after having visited the meadow. You're, in a sense, blissful or happy. Why? Because you no longer believe in that nonsense being promulgated within the walls of the asylum. You don't believe it at all. And it's a happy place. And even more so, you're reaching out to people who might want to join you and find freedom for themselves. And that is a profound kind of happiness that is what compassion is all about. And if you ask the question, why would you do that? You lose its meaning, really. You could talk about why. Why would you save your children from a burning building? You're not going to stand around and think about that. You're just going to do it. And if you can't get that, then reflect on that a bit more. It's something that's fundamental to who we are, and it really doesn't have to be reasoned through at all. Is it necessary to go out into that meadow? Yes. In a sense, tasting that consciousness. It's not literally a taste. It's like a taste that you have, or a fragrance that you inhale. Something that's so indescribably wonderful. When we try to reduce reality to a thought, we destroy it. We make a little box. What is it? It's a box. We open it up. There's nothing inside. Or there's another little box inside, and then we open that. It never ends. When we're attached to thinking, we're just fascinated with it, and we can't get away. Any degree of waking up is of great value. To fully wake up, to realize what this truth is, this freedom, this boundless happiness, we have to, in some sense, detach fully from the nightmare of the asylum. We have to cross that threshold and, in some sense, wake up fully. Otherwise, there's a part of us that's still attaching to that nonsense in the asylum as if there was something there that we needed to know. Like there was some secret being whispered. Once you realize what suffering is, you stop. And then it's over.